Today on Ag News Daily.
The grower owns their data, but we aggregate and anonymize that data, and then we run it through our carbon sequestration models to build a carbon credit that we can then put out there on the voluntary carbon market space. And what that really does is allows us to connect the grower into the broader environment.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily podcast. Delaney Howell here, joined by Michelle Stangler, as Tanner is out on the road this week. We can say on assignment, Michelle. I think that sounds very official.
Yeah, looks like they're doing a lot of fun interviews.
They are, and we'll hopefully hear more from his time. I believe he's at the I'm not even going to try to pronounce what the acronym is. So, a conservation conference this week.
Yeah, it'll be fun, and there's just a lot of farm meetings happening at this time of the year. So what will happen come spring, what decisions will be made, it's always interesting to have those learning opportunities.
It is. I also have to give a quick shout out. Was in Mendota, Illinois yesterday, speaking with a group of farmers, and I had one come up and tell me he loved listening to the podcast. So I unfortunately didn't catch his name, but if you're listening, thanks for stopping by and saying hi.
Yeah, and if you ever have any ideas of events to go to or any farm interviews, I think some of our team would certainly be interested. So feel free to connect with us via email. I'll make sure to put those in the email in the show notes.
Well, I don't know, Michelle, how it's feeling in Wisconsin, although I know you're heading on the road next week as well for a fun show. But for the weather in the days ahead, we're going to see still some cold conditions as several weather fronts are going to continue to sweep through the Midwest, bringing fluctuations in temperature and a little bit of light snow here and there, including the lake effect snow. In the south and eastern U.S., dangerously cold temperatures and wind chill values will persist for much of this next week, and the sharp cold snap has been taking a toll on livestock as well as winter wheat and many other crops in the colder regions of the upper Midwest. That's really increased some stress among livestock herds. However, a late January thaw is expected for parts of the Midwest, offering some relief. Despite some recent snowfall across rural America, long-term drought conditions remain a concern. Eric Snodgrass, principal atmospheric scientist with Conduit Ag, warns that while current snow adds moisture, it cannot yet be utilized by the soil. He notes that snow in March will be more critical for soil moisture than snowfall that we're seeing right now. He also pointed out that La Niña is a key driver to the current weather patterns that we're experiencing here, explaining that atmospheric momentum has been inconsistent. This unpredictability contributes to the dry conditions that could elevate drought risk in 2025, despite the snow that we're now seeing. So, in climate news, the National Centers for Environmental Information reports that December was the fourth warmest December on record. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says this contributed to 2024 being the warmest year on record in the United States, with an average annual temperature of about 55.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So, interesting news there as we head into another growing season here very shortly.
Yeah, it's almost February, so time is going to continue to go by fast. But in ag policy news, we have a lot of that news here in today's show. But stick with us as we have a fun story before today's interview on carbon programs. President Trump has not imposed tariffs on Mexico and Canada, as previously indicated. Instead, Farm Policy News reports that the president is considering potential 25% duties on imports from the U.S. North American neighbors by February 1st, citing concerns over illegal immigration and fentanyl trafficking into the United States. In the meantime, President Trump has directed federal agencies to investigate persistent U.S. trade deficits, unfair trade practices, and allegations of currency manipulation by other countries. When asked about the possibility of across-the-board tariffs on all imports, Trump responded, "We may, but we aren't ready for that right now." The president has also delayed imposing tariffs on Chinese goods. Instead, his administration will examine whether China has adhered to the Phase 1 trade deal from his first term. In response, Canadian officials announced they are prepared to retaliate against any potential U.S. tariffs. Second day in office earlier this week, President Trump issued tariff threats aimed at China and the European Union. Bloomberg reports that White House officials are discussing a possible 10% tariff on China, linking it to claims that fentanyl is entering the United States via Mexico and Canada with connections to China. President Trump's threatened tariffs are drawing criticism from both Democrats and mixed reviews from Republicans, and his trade moves go further than just tariffs. That's one of the many ag policy news we'll hear today. Just talking about a lot of the top executive orders that were signed earlier this week.
Yeah, and this is really the first time we're hearing about the Phase 1 trade deal with China in quite some time, so it's interesting to see that resurface in the news. But just one day after President Trump signed an executive order freezing all federal regulations pending a 60-day review, a bipartisan group of senators reintroduced the Farm to Fly Act to accelerate the production of sustainable aviation fuel. The freeze includes guidance documents and regulations that have been previously published in the Federal Reserve but have not yet taken effect. This applies to the Treasury Department's guidance on the 45Z Clean Fuels Production Credit from the Inflation Reduction Act. While the notice of proposed guidelines for 45Z released earlier this month does not require publication in the Federal Register, further progress in finalizing the guidelines will likely be paused. Clean Fuels Alliance America is advising its members to use the IRS 45Z notice and supporting information from the USDA and Department of Energy as a framework for now. However, these are not final, and the Trump administration could issue a separate notice overriding that current framework. The Farm to Fly Act aims to expand markets for crops used to produce sustainable aviation fuel and clarify eligibility for SAF within USDA bioenergy programs. Supporters say that this legislation could accelerate progress in meeting avian industry sustainability goals. So more to come on that, hopefully here soon.
Continuing with environmental policy here, President Trump has pledged to revoke what he called the Biden administration's electric vehicle mandate, a move he claims will save the U.S. auto industry and honor a commitment to the United Auto Workers. President Trump signed several executive orders addressing the Biden administration's EV policies in the so-called Green New Deal. The Biden-era tailpipe emissions rule adopted by the EPA in 2023 was described as technology neutral, allowing manufacturers to meet the standards with as little as 31% of their fleets being electric vehicles by 2030, according to goals. His vow to end the Green New Deal raises uncertainty about the future of climate-smart agricultural programs funded through the Inflation Reduction Act, which many farmers have embraced as a new way to reduce carbon emissions while supporting rural economies. The impact of these policy changes on both the agriculture sector and the U.S. energy industry will be closely watched in the weeks to come, so stay tuned here to hear on Ag News Daily.
Well, Michelle, we're going to continue with the policy news front, but this one is a big one for agriculture. All eyes are on Brooke Rollins this week, as longtime USDA Chief Information Officer Gary Washington has been named acting Secretary of the USDA here in the interim. But Rollins was one of the first cabinet members, I believe, announced by President Trump on his campaign trail. And we saw this week Agriculture Secretary nominee Rollins testified in front of the Senate Ag Committee on Thursday this week, where she outlined some of her key priorities for agriculture. In her opening statement, some of those several key priorities she shared included rapid deployment of disaster and economic assistance for farmers authorized by Congress, addressing current animal disease outbreaks such as avian influenza, modernizing and realigning the USDA, not too much detail there about what that means yet, and ensuring long-term prosperity for rural communities. You know, one of those big question marks a lot of folks had heading into that committee hearing was her true stance on ethanol and the renewable fuels standard. She did quite a bit to distance herself from her past position that was taken as her role in Texas's Public Policy Foundation. And she stated that the foundation's position on ethanol and RFS was written nearly a decade ago, and was one of about 900 to 1,000 papers produced annually. She emphasized she did not author those papers, and she did admit to being a previous defender of fossil fuels, but insisted that she would be a secretary for all and champion all fuels. So not necessarily direct support there for the renewable energy space, but certainly her note and recognition that she needed to support that, as that was a big part of the agricultural community. Support for Rollins is strong in the community overall. Last week, 427 national and state agricultural organizations and agribusinesses sent a letter to the Senate Ag Committee urging for prompt confirmation, emphasizing her leadership is vital for the future of American agriculture. Chairman Bozeman said that members of the Senate now have until 6 p.m. on Friday to submit any additional questions for Rollins about her confirmation. And once those questions are resolved, the committee will be free to consider her nomination. So, Michelle, it could be just a mere matter of days until we get official word and may have a new Secretary of Agriculture.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, we are recording this Friday morning, and so this news can change by the day and the hour. So continue to follow us for more updates. But another related news and a bold and somewhat unconventional move, Iowa Senator Mike Bolsolt is proposing to make Minnesota Iowa again by purchasing the bottom 9 counties of Minnesota. Speaking at the Land Investment Expo on Tuesday, Senator Bolsolt, a Republican from Ankeny, announced plans to introduce a bill in the Iowa legislature to acquire the counties. While the specific language of the bill hasn't been released, Bolsolt agrees that the idea has historical roots, stating that while the Iowa territory originally existed, we went further north into what is currently Minnesota, and many of those counties were originally going to be part of Iowa. If the proposal were successful, roughly 185,000 Minnesotans would become Iowans, representing just over 3% of Minnesota's population. Additionally, more than 8,000 farms, accounting for nearly 19% of Minnesota's agricultural sales, would also shift to Iowa, according to the USDA's 2022 Census of Agriculture.
Yeah, when I saw this story come across, I thought, this is a wild thing that they're even proposing, Michelle. No idea how realistic this is to make it happen. But I think, one of the other things that he stated was a lot of those counties, as you just mentioned, have a lot of agriculture. And so Iowa has maybe more traditionally been focused on agriculture as key policy. So I think that was another reason why Senator Bolsolt wanted to bring that up. But whether or not that makes any moves, we'll see. However, Iowa isn't alone in entertaining state boundary adjustments. Indiana is also considering a similar proposal. House Speaker Todd Houston introduced House Bill 1008, which would establish a commission to explore acquiring several Illinois counties. The move comes after several Illinois counties voted to explore leaving the state, citing dissatisfaction with state policies. If Indiana were to acquire these 7 Illinois counties, it would gain nearly 5,500 farms and 2 million acres of farmland, collectively accounting for about 7% of Illinois' agricultural sales. However, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker dismissed Indiana's proposal as a political stunt, telling the Indy Star it wasn't going to happen. So both proposals highlight some growing tensions we've seen between states and regions, but face significant legal, logistical, and political hurdles before ever becoming a reality.
I didn't get too into the weeds and the data on this one, but I don't know how often this actually happens.
I agree.
It's super interesting that this is even being a conversation that's talked about. So what will happen in the coming months, especially with states legislation like Wisconsin starting their budget hearings, is just super interesting to watch. So if you hear something, listeners, just feel free to let us know and we'll follow the issue. But in some good news, here's some heartwarming news to brighten your day. A 12-year-old girl who grew up in the dairy industry received a life-saving heart transplant this week after being diagnosed with restrictive cardiomyopathy. Scientific words are really hard for me. In December of 2023, this rare condition causes the heart's lower chambers to become stiff, limiting blood flow. Lexi, who shared her story with the U.S. Farm Report, among many other national news outlets, noted that only 2% of the world's populations face this condition. Billy and I have been really watching this story unfold the past year and have loved seeing how this is really continuing to grow the agricultural community and coming together. Because Lexi is a Wisconsinite, and it's been fun to watch her and exhibited at this past year's World Dairy Expo, which I attended. Her story has gained nationwide attention, like I mentioned, including a feature in People magazine after a friend raised $27,000 for her family at a county fair. It's truly this agricultural community rallied around Lexi under the banner of Love for Lexi, showing incredible support for her and her family during this challenging time. So this is truly a beautiful story of resilience, community, and hope to close today's news, wishing Lexi and her family all the best as she begins her new chapter with a healthy heart.
What a fun story to end our news section for this week after some heavier policy news. But Michelle, turning things over to this week's interview, we're talking about carbon once again and how one program began as an emerging idea a few years ago and what it looks like today. We will also hear what this means for farmers like Ben Runch with Bayer. Let's get into that interview right after this message.
Calving season is a favorite time of year, but along with that special time are dangers, extra stress, and increased labor. Safety Zone calf catchers are all about safety and making processing new calves easier. Designed for ATVs or UTVs, one person can do the job and never be threatened by the protective mother cow. Make this and every calving season safer and easier with a Safety Zone calf catcher. Watch videos and customer testimonials or order yours today at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914. Affordable and made in the USA. Make your upcoming and all future calving seasons safer, easier, and stress-free. Durable and designed to work anywhere you can drive your ATV or UTV. Order online at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914 today.
To talk a little more about carbon, I'm here with Ben Runch. He is here with Bayer. Tell me a little bit about what kind of carbon programs you have.
Yeah, so the Bayer carbon program is facilitated through our Foreground by Bayer platform. And really what that platform is designed to be a place where growers can interact and gain agronomic resources, discounts with other industry partners, as well as access to new revenue streams through our carbon program offerings. And so, it's really a great time and a great opportunity for growers to not just earn on what they farm, but how they farm.
Let's maybe take a step back.
Yeah, absolutely.
What did this look like a few years ago?
A few years ago, this was just really just an emerging idea, right? And how can we connect growers to this idea of a voluntary carbon market space where we have consumer packaged goods companies and others really looking to offset the impact of their production and their manufacturing while also having a positive impact for growers. And so the idea kind of came around, how can we connect the consumer packaged goods companies and others looking to offset their emissions with growers that are looking to do the right thing on their farm, both from a soil health standpoint as well as just, doing better practices on the farm that they know are going to increase their bottom line.
So it really began as an idea, and now what does the specifics actually look like? What are the requirements? And there's quite a few programs too, so if you can touch upon, I know that there's some at Bayer, but the market overall.
Yeah, so when I'm speaking to growers out in the field, the way I kind of break down this very complex space is really there's two types of programs available out there. There's practice-based programs that validate that a practice is occurring in the field and pay on that practice, and then there's outcomes-based programs. And in outcomes-based programs, they take measurements of the soil organic carbon and then pay based on the rate of sequestration that they see. There's pros and cons to both sides of the program, so we always encourage people to really do their research and do their due diligence on what program best fits their needs. We went with a practice-based program because we find that it's a little simpler, a little easier to understand, and you know what you can take to the bank if you're implementing those practices on your farm. And when I say practices, I mean things like no-till, strip-till, cover crops, things that have multiple benefits for the soil, like increased nutrient retention, increased soil water infiltration, biodiversity below ground and above ground. So there's a lot of different added benefits to implementing these practices on the farm.
So how are you measuring that back and then eventually paying the farmer Do you get some kind of records from them? What does that look like?
Absolutely. No, that's a great question. So what we do is in a practice-based program, we go out to the field, we meet with the grower. Once they enroll, we verify that those practices that they've enrolled are occurring. So, things like the cover crop, the no-till, strip-till. We go out, take field photos, and we meet with the grower to get kind of some basic historical information about what farming practices have occurred on that field in the past, as well as what they're continuously implementing in the field. So, it's really a once-a-year meeting that really makes it easy for growers to navigate the space. We've got somebody that, caters directly to them in the field and meets with them to handle all that information collection and hopefully make it easy to facilitate that payment.
So you have that meeting, and then what?
And then from there, we go in and we take the information, we aggregate that information. The grower owns their data. It's similar to a lot of the things that we say about our climate field view platform, right? The grower owns their data, but we aggregate and anonymize that data, and then we run it through our carbon sequestration models to build a carbon credit that we can then put out there on the voluntary carbon market space. And what that really does is allows us to connect the grower into the broader environment.
So when you
carbon market environment, excuse me.
So when you pay them, is it per month? What does that look like?
It's an annual payment. Our contract term is 5 years, and so it's an annual payment. Generally, we try to get those payments out by the spring, do that data collection in the fall, and then pay the growers in the spring on an annual basis. One of the great aspects of our program versus some of the other programs that you see in the marketplace is that we offer a historical payment as well. So if a grower has implemented these practices after the fall of 2019, we can actually do a 4-year historical look back and pay for the practices that occurred up to 4 years ago. And so that really kind of gives us a little bit of a competitive edge because not a lot of programs offer a historical look back period like we do. But we feel it's valuable because, the grower has already implemented those practices. They've already taken that step to take progressive steps to implement those practices on the farm. So we want to reward them for that.
So you're paying them, and then where are you selling that to, can I ask?
Yeah, absolutely. No, we try to access the voluntary carbon market space where, there's a lot of different industries that access the carbon markets to offset the emissions associated with their production. But a lot of times we focus in on the food and beverage companies because food and beverage companies have grain in their supply chains, and so they're looking to offset the emissions associated with that grain production as well as the rest of their supply chain. So we work with a lot of different food and beverage companies out there. I think I'm free to say like Mars Pet Nutrition is a great example of a company that we have collaborated with, and there's several others throughout the industry.
So there's a number tied with it, the carbon credits, but how much do they know? How do they know how much they need to have?
In terms of the the carbon sequestration potential, or in terms of, so I guess I'll step back a little bit. The way our program works is, it's based on the practice being implemented in the field. And so the risk that we take as Bayer is that, there's some soil types that don't have as much carbon sequestration potential, and other soil types have a lot of carbon sequestration potential, but we've opened up our eligibility. We now offer our program in 28 states, and so it's really Bayer's risk. If that soil doesn't sequester as much carbon as we hoped, that's Bayer's problem, not the growers. So we pay on the practice, we pay what we say, and so a grower has an opportunity to earn on those practices, and we just try to validate that carbon sequestration is occurring on those fields.
Certainly really great information, but more on the when a company approaches you that they want to buy a certain amount of carbon credits, how do they come up with that certain amount to offset?
It's kind of a complicated process of carbon accounting for a lot of industry, industry company or industrial companies that are looking to offset not only the carbon associated, the carbon emissions, the indirect emissions associated with their production. That can be everything from accounting for the energy that they consume in producing their products. It can account for, the trucks that they have on the road to deliver their products. And so the carbon accounting process is really how these corporations arrive at the numbers that they need to account for in order to buy carbon credits.
A lot of interesting information, the specifics, hear a lot about it. Thank you so much for joining. Anything else that you want to add?
No, I would say if growers are looking for more information about this space, visit BayerForeground.com. That's Bayer, FORGROUND.com. There's a lot of information. There's agronomic resources and kind of showcases our industry partnerships and access to these revenue streams.
Well, Delaney, before diving into ag market news, we're closely watching the Brazilian soybean harvest and how it compares to previous years. According to agribusiness consultancy Ag Rural, the harvest from the 2024 through 2025 season has reached just 1.7% of the planted area as of late last Thursday, they had shared in a successful farming article. The delay is attributed to excessive rainfall in Mato Grosso, Brazil's top grain-producing state. Ag Rural noted that the harvesting pace in that area is now the slowest in the data series, which began in the 2010 to 2011 season. So what does that mean for markets? What are some top headlines you're watching, Delaney?
Well, we're still continuing to get quite a bit of kind of 2024 data wrapped up in review. And so I think one of the big things I've been watching here lately, just speaking yesterday at an event, for a group of farmers in Mendota, Illinois, really talking about what the impact of the global economy has here overall. And more specifically, watching China in particular. China just released a fresh round of stimulus packages here for their Chinese consumer a couple of weeks ago. Was listening to another podcast the other day, Michelle, and it's calling this latest round of stimulus package for China. If you were to translate the Mandarin version into English, it loosely translates into the machine that you have the two paddles and you defibrillate someone alive. So this new Chinese stimulus package really is kind of being called the defibrillator package for China. So really starting to see some cracks here in the Chinese economy. What does that mean for agriculture? Well, we just saw some fresh data here released. Reuters' Ella Chow reported on Monday that Chinese soybean imports from the United States dropped about 5.5% in 2024 compared to the previous year. And overall, we're seeing China really go to the buying table with Brazil. So that story you just mentioned there about Brazilian harvest is going to be really important to see how much crop they have coming out of the fields. And as you look at Brazilian soybean prices compared to the U.S. soybean prices here, still at a significant discount. Brazilian soybeans are about $1 cheaper, both from the Brazilian real being cheaper, logistic and export costs being a little bit cheaper. And so China is going to continue going to the Brazilian soybean front there due to all of those market factor conditions. But nonetheless, the markets aren't paying a ton of attention to that right now. That's kind of a bigger story playing out at a macro level. This week, the markets are all focused on President Trump stepping into office. And we saw this week corn and soybean prices continue to consolidate near this week's market highs. As we look at last year compared to this year, for the year so far, I know it's only the 24th of January, but corn is up nearly 7% on the board year to date. Soybeans close to 6% higher. So grains are seeing a lot of positive support as President Trump steps into office here, but they're not the only markets seeing some large support. The S&P 500 stock index hit a new high, record high on Wednesday, with stocks generally supported by actions taken thus far by the Trump administration. And then as we look at some of our larger trade relations, Michelle, I know you mentioned earlier in the show that President Trump hasn't indicated necessarily he was going to impose any tariffs yet, but we did just see some last-minute news here as he's in Switzerland. He used a high-profile appearance to share with the world that he was foreshadowing some broader tariff actions and accused trading partners of taking advantage of the United States. So we still don't have confirmation as to when or what he will do with these tariffs, but looking to our trade relationships, in particular with China, China's Vice President Zhang attended the Trump inauguration on Monday. His presence is widely speculated by a lot of political analysts to be strategic in nature, signaling that President Xi Jinping is willing to improve relations with the United States. So overall that's kind of a little bit of a wrap up of the news and markets this week, Michelle.
Yeah, I know you mentioned you were talking a lot about 2024, and I'd found that a recent poll asked farmers where they plan to cut costs, and this poll says that equipment purchases topped the list, but farmers also plan to scale back on their fertilizer rates using more generic products and reduce tillage or field passes. So what will truly happen this year, I'm sure at this year's Commodity Classic, where there will be a lot of those conversations continuing to happen, what will be planted with corn and soybean acres, those numbers continuing to really talk about here in the winter months as we go into spring. But right now I started my travels early, and I'm in the southern part of the United States, and it's 50 degrees, so it's nice to have some kind of warmth in my week compared to where I'm from in Wisconsin. It's a bit cold there, especially this past week.
Well, it's interesting. We should have mentioned it in the news section of our show today. A lot of folks in the South, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, a lot of those states are getting some snow this week as well. So I guess count your blessings if you're in an area where you aren't getting it this week. But as we look to the weekend here, hope everyone has a great weekend ahead of them. You can follow along with us on social media. If you're missing us in the meantime, you can find us on every major social platform: Facebook, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and TikTok. But Michelle, I think that does it for this week's show. What do you say we let the people go?
Let's let them go.